Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And at this time, the chair recognizes Ranking Member and fellow Oklahoman, Mr. Lucas, for his opening statement and introduction of another fellow Oklahoman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Tomorrow marks the 50th anniversary of Apollo 12's launch. November 14, 1969, Pete Conrad, Alan Bean, Richard Gordon set off on humanity's second mission to the lunar surface. Despite harrowing winds and lightning strikes that overloaded the spacecraft's fuel cells during the launch, the mission's success proved that America's resolve to explore space. It demonstrated that Apollo 11 wasn't a fluke or a one-time achievement, but rather the dawn of a new era for mankind. The missions after Apollo 11 may not have been as celebrated, but they solidified America's leadership in space and were just as valuable to our studies of the moon. But what if we did not return to the moon after Apollo 11? And thankfully we did, and we followed that up with a string of successful launches culminating in Apollo 17. Unfortunately, we haven't been back to the moon since Gene Cernan left his daughter's initials in the lunar dust in 1972 on Apollo 17. That's 47 years, nearly a half a century. I can't help but draw comparisons to the current state of human space exploration. Rather than canceling a return to the moon by saying we've been there before, the Trump administration set a bold course to return to the moon and assure American leadership in space. Just as Apollo 12 affirmed America's resolve last century, the administration's plans to return to the moon will demonstrate our resolve and leadership in this century. This is because we have the potential to learn much more now than we did a half a century ago. Just last week, NASA scientists opened an untouched sample of lunar rocks collected during Apollo 17. We kept those samples preserved for nearly 50 years because we knew our technology would advance rapidly in the years following Apollo 17, and we could learn more from analyzing them now in pristine conditions than we could have at the time. Similarly, returning to the moon now will help us develop the technology necessary to land humans on Mars. It will allow our astronauts to learn how to operate in deep space and on the surface of another world only a few days away, rather than months or years away. The Artemis program has already energized the NASA workforce, motivated contractors, inspired scientists and students. Artemis will require marshaling our nation's best and brightest, as well as significant contributions from our international partners and the private sector. This is a worthwhile task because great nations do great things. As we set forth on our return to the moon, we should always be mindful of the lessons we learned from Apollo and the decades that followed. Progressing incrementally on successful achievements, limiting the number of mission elements to decrease risk, and maintaining consistency of purpose are lessons that are just as relevant today as they were 50 years ago. Luckily, we have two great witnesses who I'm sure can add to this list for us. And as the chairman noted, one of those witnesses is a fellow Oklahoman, Lieutenant General Thomas Stafford, retired. He grew up in Weatherford, Oklahoma, which I proudly represent. And after attending the Naval Academy and serving as an Air Force test pilot, he was selected for astronaut group number 2 in 1962. He went on to fly aboard Gemini 6A, Gemini 9, Apollo 10, and Apollo Soyuz test project. He served as a director of the astronaut office, commanded the Air Force Flight Test Center in Edwards Air Force Base, and was Deputy Chief of Staff, Research, Development, and Acquisition at the Pentagon. Since retirement, he served as the chairman of the International Space Station Advisory Committee, chaired the synthesis group that produced the report entitled America at the Threshold on the Space Exploration Initiative. His awards are too numerous to mention, but probably his finest accomplishment is being born in western Oklahoma, where, I would note, his namesake, the Stafford Air and Space Museum, resides. I'm proud to call him a constituent, a friend, a confidant. Thank you for holding this hearing, Madam Chair. I yield back the balance of my time and look forward to the testimony.